next session is a gold medal coach session. I have the pleasure to introduce Malcolm Brown. Malcolm Brown is a performance coach based at the Leeds Triathlon Center. Mr. Brown has coached many athletes to international gold medals at Commonwealth, European, World, and Olympic level, and was British Triathlon Olympic Performance Manager for the London 2012 Olympic Games. He has been coaching the Brownlee brothers along with Jack Maitland since they were young teenagers. His career started with a degree in teaching physical education and English. He has worked at 4 different universities in academic and departmental roles. Mr. Brown has awarded an MBE in the Queen's New Year's Honours List in January 2013, and most recently has awarded an honorary doctorate in sports science from the Leeds University. I would also like to introduce Inaki Arenal. His passion for triathlon and competing started early in 1989 Avignon ITU World Triathlon Championships, where he competed as an elite athlete. Mr. Arenal became qualified as a level 3 coach and was the manager of the technical program in Madrid from 2006 to 2012. Starting in 2013, he was promoted to the position of high-level performance team manager of the highly successful Spanish Triathlon Federation. Today, we are going to seek answers from Mr. Arenal and Mr. Brown on some of the questions outlined in the final program, as well as some of the questions of our delegates provided via SurveyMonkey. I have perhaps some of the questions that were highlighted in the program. I will start with some of these questions, and after a few questions, I will ask some of you that have sent in some of your questions to actually ask the panel your questions, and then we'll open up to the floor. So maybe to start and follow up on Dr. Cote's presentation, from your perspective, what are some reliable early indicators for identifying talents in your younger athletes you're working with?
And respect of the questions, in Spain, a lot of time, about 14 years ago, we have PNTD, the same program developed, and we look for young athletes. And the first time that we do with the program is to make a test of all the regions of Spain about four distance, 2 swimming and 2 running, and that's 100 meters and 1,000 meters in swimming, and 400 meters and 1,000 meters on running. And we are looking for the talent, the early talent that in the group of age that 14 to 19 years old, and we look for the best result that the children can do it without a training or low training to do this. Why? Because everybody with talent can do this so well if they have talent, and we can know who is it. Every year in January month, we can show about the last year about 600 children, women and men, and we take the results and we look for the best athletes that we can to teach to learn to the high level.
British Triathlon has a similar spreadsheet of requirements in terms of physical performance in swimming and in running for entry into regional academies. But what it doesn't have is measures of perseverance, resilience, endurance, and we know that those factors, because you can't measure them, are extremely difficult to interpret with young athletes. And indeed, even those athletes who do well on the physical tests, it may be due to advanced levels of training at an early age, and that obscures something that might be called talent. In fact, training and talent are so intertwined that it's actually very, very complicated. And the Olympic champion, Alistair Brownlee, at the age of 11, was 180th in a cross-country race at junior level in Yorkshire, in the county that we live in. So if we were looking at talent at 11, we'd have picked 179 other athletes, or maybe we have 179 gold medalists lurking somewhere in the UK, but I doubt it.
No, we begin at 14 years old. And now, I don't say before this intervention, now we are going to thinking about to change something, because in the first time that's very easy to us to look for the talent, the pure talent, because the children go to the test and is another activity that. But now the social communications of everybody, and now made that everybody go to the test with hard training, and that is more difficult for us to look for a real talent.
The age where formal entry, if you like, into the British Triathlon pyramid starts is age 14. And there are regional, what they call academies, which are loose arrangements of getting together the talent in school holidays and occasional weekends, and that runs from age 14 to 19, and at age 18, 19, there's a further selection after that.
All right, thank you. Now I'd like to maybe challenge the two of you to think back to Alex's talk this morning. And we were wondering, what sources of information do you find reliable and that you end up using in your coaching work with the athletes?
Normal, when we have athletes near, we have good relationships with them, and we have to take some information about their training days. But now, the last year, we tried to do something different only with our athletes that we are in the high-level performance center in Madrid. That is heart rate variability with an app, and every day they have to introduce the results in the app, and at the beginning the information is a little clear, but after the days, after the months, we can see about something to look for. Be careful with the injuries. That is our problem. The biggest problem that we have along the season is the injuries, and now we are going to work about the identification, the moments that we have more dangerous in it.
We have what's called an English Institute of Sport, which provides sports science support across the Olympic sports, 26 Olympic sports, and we have a part-time performance scientist, and he would filter information and provide suggestions to the coaches, and we also have the daily app, which athletes are offered the opportunity to fill in terms of their readiness to train, so resting heart rate, quality of sleep, hours of sleep. what I find is that the superstar athletes aren't interested in doing that at all, won't do it. Those who are on their way up and feel a little bit more unsure maybe of their position on the funded program are more willing to fill it in. In terms of reliability information, I think asking the athlete who's standing in front of you how they feel and then measuring that response against their swim program, what they're doing, how they're hitting their times, is the most reliable and valid indicator of readiness to train, if you like.
Could you describe the sports science team that is available to your athletes and coaches? And then maybe follow up that with, if you could design a sports science team that would be optimal around your team, what would it look like?
We work in a high-level performance of Madrid. That is the great group of we have of athletes in Spain. That the people that are working make like a team, and the team is composed by a doctor, a physiotherapist, psychologist, and 3 coaches. Then they attend all the trainings and all of the programmation of the week, the programmation of the month, the general period about all the athletes, and the team specific, the doctor and the psychologists will work with all athletes that we consider elite.
Design a sports scientist, that's an interesting question. As Jan was saying about coaching, really, I think the qualities of the outstanding sports scientists I've met have not been so much around their technical competence and knowledge, but more around their interpersonal skills and emotional intelligence. So I'm looking for people who come with a healthy dose of skepticism about the value of any intervention, who indicate that melon juice may not be as valuable as nitrates, but if one of the athletes believes that melon juice helps, then we've got to deal with that. And also I would say that no job is too small. You can't have silos in high performance anything, in my view, whether it's business or trying to win Olympic medals. And if a sports scientist wants to be engaged by highly demanding, difficult athletes who are also chronically fatigued for most of their existence, then they need a bit of emotional intelligence and a wee bit of resilience to the occasional setback, unpleasant comment. So there's a whole host, really, of interpersonal skills, willingness, no job too small, willing to be flexible in locations that are really, really important. And I'm not sure if they're taught in many sports science degree courses, undergraduate programs.
I'd like to open the floor to the delegates that have sent some interesting questions. So, Julien Cloenen, please ask your question.
Yeah, my question was about the pathway from a young athlete to an elite athlete. I think the big problem is to find a good athlete, because finally he has to be an Olympic champion. So how deal you with that? And how can you find this best athlete? That's my first question. And my next question is about, we know that they have a kind of performance for 100 meter swim or 200 meter swim or whatever, but what do we need to find this good athlete? So what time is it? So that we can see, yes, that's fine. And then, okay, we have to look for everything else, like resilience and everything. But I think everything begins with with the performance?
For the first questions, we try to all the athletes made all the way in their categories. The junior pass for the junior categories all the time, and don't change to the category over there. But sometimes an athletes can do better things for the grow up that is necessary to compete or to in other class of races, and if they are with some control or any control to do well, I think so that's no problems. And for the second question, we have a scale with all the times that they can do, and that they are from the 10 to the 1, and we make with that is a classification of all the athletes in Spain, and the best one now I don't remember, but I think so for the 19 years is in 11:20 for the men in 1,000 meters swimming, but in the other about 2.40 in the middle, the 1,000 meters running. That's I think so, but I don't remember now. You can see in our web.
Similarly, on the British Triathlon website, you can find the performance section. You can find those. But I think underlying your question, if I may be so rude as to question the philosophy, triathlon is a really, really tough sport, and people have to commit many, many hours of training if they are going to fulfill their potential. And at the Leeds Triathlon Centre, we've adopted a very inclusive attitude to having athletes in the centre. So we, in fact, we do have trials at the beginning of the year, but almost everybody gets through and will be coached in one of our 4 coaching groups, because for the best athletes to succeed, they need training partners. And those training partners may not be great triathletes, but they might be the best swimmer in the group, or they might be the best runner, or the person who's willing to cycle in the depths of our English winters with the guys who have got the talent. And so, I would encourage a broader thinking about endurance training, which means that the group is a critical mass is absolutely invaluable in terms of any individual succeeding. It also is a word I don't think we'll hear a lot in the next 2 days. It's fun. And without fun, why are we doing it? And I think that's a really, really important part of the equation, is that it can't all be about ambition and desire and drive. As Jean was saying in his earlier presentation, there has to be meaning in it for athletes, and often the meaning is the social context of the training. And I think at Leeds we've done well in both the men and the women, because we've created environments where it's fun.
As a developmental youth coach, I know a lot of your elite athletes are going to be coming out of developmental programs. What type of behaviors or skills do you want to see developmental coaches providing your elite athletes through the channels? And what kind of behaviors of coaching that those developmental coaches do you wish they wouldn't do in order to help pipeline athletes into an elite program? So you're going to have coaches who are working with a variety of different athletes, and some are going to show talent and eventually end up in your programs. What kind of things do you want to see from those coaches and don't want to see?
That's a good question. I think some of the messages we heard in just the previous session are really important around the social relations. I have found that when people come into the Leeds Triathlon Centre at the age of 18, they come with, an armory of abilities and achievements. But the thing that I'm looking for in the athlete is trainability. In other words, are they able to train on a regular basis, and do they enjoy that process? Coachability. So given the internet, every athlete is an expert coach now. Well, you say do this, Malcolm. Well, why don't we do it that way? I don't really want that conversation every day, 3 times a day, with every different athlete. So coachability and respect for the other athletes and people in the centre, and the fact that Alistair Brownlee can do this and Vicky is allowed to do that, and they have a whole 8 or 10 person support team, doesn't mean that you at the age of 18, even though you're the best in Britain, are going to have that either. So a sort of respect about earning the right to do. So those are the things that I want the athletes to come to, and you're the coach who has to provide that for us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I really want to make a remark, and just taking in consideration what you were talking before. It's about the environment that is necessary for having fun and etc. I really want to remark that it's so important. Well, this is my question. Sorry to do it in this way, but for the women, it's very, very important. And I think as much as I remember when I was working in the National Federation of the Spanish National Federation, that at that point we have to really focus on having the groups of training groups for women, because that was very difficult, because they are not, the numbers are lower than the men, unfortunately. Then I think the question is, do you have any point just to make about this, and just with all the people that is here, just to enhance this item? No?
When I talk for the women, it's because Spanish Triathlon Federation, of course, everybody knows that Javi Comendoya, Mario Mola, the first one, the world championships, and no women. That's not really, but because if we take the E2 point leads about the first 100 athletes, we have only 5 men, but we have 4 women, and that's a similar number. But the men are the first, the third, 5, and the women are the 40th, 50th, 60th. But that's not important now. No? Well, now we are going to try with the women that has the similar program that the men, and we know that we have to do any more. We have to do any special for the women. Now we are going to train in this year in the highest level performances with a group of 8 women, and we are going to try to do different things for there, that we are going to grow up our level.
Thank you.
I got into trouble many years ago by making a statement about that I felt that one needed to treat women athletes as a coach, treat women athletes differently from men. And this was a feminist convention in California. And this was heresy at the time. We're going back many, many years. But I always felt that in my experience that the requirements of female athletes are somewhat different from men, and that coaches needed to be able to flex their style and approach if they were to maximize the potential of females. And I'm really proud of the fact that at Leeds we've managed to also create a good women's group. I think the physical and long-term development of female endurance athletes in triathlon is very different from the male development. So that, for instance, Alistair and Johnny and the Brownlee brothers were Olympic medalists at 23, 24 years of age in Rio. I think 29 was the youngest female athlete on the podium. So it's a longer-term development. I think there are more conflicts in the mind of women about, is it legitimate for them to commit their career at an early age? This is a generalization, and there will be exceptions. And we find that when they come to Leeds at 18, they come usually, in almost every case, to study at the universities. And then we prioritize that for 3 years, so they get their degree. And then we find that they are happier to commit fully to full-time training once they have the security of professional qualification behind them. And then they can take that 5, 6, 7 years to get onto the podium. Whereas with Alistair and Johnny and the boys, it's, you know, the academic work is just a sort of side issue to the main stuff, which is being a great triathlete. So I think there are different psychological approaches which coaches have to try to tease out and be aware of.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Can you think of an example of the best science intervention that you've experienced in your careers and why it worked so well? So it could be medical, could be physiology, strength and conditioning, whatever it is. The best intervention, so like your HRV, has that been the best thing that you've taken from sports science? And if so, why was it so successful? Or it might be an individual project with another athlete.
Well, I'll go back to when there was no sports science back in the old days, and I think the intervention or the categorization of an approach to training, which resulted in there being understanding of training zones, was the sort of first systematic rather than anecdotal. You know, and when I looked at this work that was coming out of various universities and the European Journal of Applied Physiology and the rest of it on training zones, and I matched it against the training of athletes, the actual training as recorded, there was a match, and it indicated to me that the scientific approach that was being generated in the exercise physiology labs and the practical everyday experience of the top athletes coincided. And I think that framework is now, you know, old hat. Everybody would use that and be familiar with it. But in terms of actually legitimizing sports science value in high-performance sport, that was quite a strong statement, I thought.
Thanks a lot to both of you for some really interesting insights. My question is sort of a little similar to what came before. I'm just curious, you both have long experience in the sport. What, if anything, has changed in the approach of top athletes in the last, let's say, 10 years? Are you doing anything differently in terms of whether it's training volume or intensity or other ancillary things, or is it still the same bread and butter?
The difference between the years now is the strength. Now, and evident in the cycling, to have a good result in a high level performance, you have to do a good cycling pace.
So are you saying resistance training? Strength?
Yes.
I think where there's been progress recently has been in our program has been on the understanding of the role of strength and conditioning for endurance athletes in terms of making them more resilient to injury prevention. Now, we would spend 3 hours a week in the gym, a couple of sessions of an hour and a half, primarily for injury prevention, and we can talk about the detail of that, but I think that previously strength and endurance were considered to be sort of polar opposites, and maybe even diametrically opposed in some ways, but that's not the case, and so we can go into that. So that's one area. And I think the other amazing thing for me really is coming from a track and field background and knowing, for instance, Mo Farah, the best runner in the world, competitive runner in the world, over 10K, 5K, does 15 hours of aerobic activity, running basically, a week, and Alistair Brownlee does 30. It's just how much volume the human body, well, Alistair Brownlee is more than 30, but we'll say averaged over 50 weeks a year. It's just how much the human body has been able to withstand. And I think those big volumes, to me, are quite remarkable, that they're able to sustain that, and not just for a 4 or 6 weeks period, but for long periods of time.
There's a question that someone asked here in the anonymous question here, but did you have any athletes that specialized early, so under the age of 15, that specialized early?
Well, we're looking for, I told about that about 14 years ago, especially they have to do many years of training, and especially to the distance. I know. Before you have, I think so, that you have to try to do the best in the short distance, and after that, that your capacity made that you will be in other distance.
It seems to me there is a correlation between the swim expertise at an early age and ultimate performance in triathlon. So a swim program is valuable, and quite a few of our athletes have swum in a local swim program until the age of 10, 12, 13, and then left it or been asked to leave it, and then moved into triathlon beyond that. But I think one of the characteristics that is really important in those early years for creating a platform for further development is a varied sports experience in those years from 8 to 14 or 15. That isn't a negative, that's a positive in my experience. And it to be unstructured. So again, with the Brownlees as an example, their parents had a small cottage in the countryside, or at least their grandparents, that their parents took the young boys to. And in the summer, they opened the door in the morning and said, off you go. And they came back when it got dark. And they'd been running, they'd been swimming in the lake, they'd been cycling in a completely unstructured way. But when they came to me at the age of 15 and 16, they had a very significant play background, which was unstructured. And it was then a question of focusing it in a more structured way. And that's why they came to find a coach, if you like, in Jack Maitland and myself in terms of the running. And they got medals very early at 22, 23, and it was a deliberate policy for us to actually get them training well and training big volumes in their formative years because they had that background. Now, with other athletes, particularly female athletes, I'm not sure that's the right approach, and I don't take that approach. And we can explain that later. But I do think that unstructured aerobic general development in those formative years was a massive reason for the success of the Brownlees later.
Concerning race pace training, do you do any specific work in preparation to do race pace training?
For the real competition? Yes. Yes, we do something, special trainings to the pace for the competition. Yes. And normally after the bike, with a running course?
Yeah, we have a fairly sort of tedious, periodized year in Leeds. It doesn't change very much. But effectively, once a week in each of the disciplines, there would be an effort. It's really the model that Professor Stephen Saylor has categorized as polarized, or maybe others have done as well, but I've read his work, and it's polarized training. So a very small proportion of the overall volume is at race pace or faster in the week, but it is every week for 48 weeks of the year, and a little bit more in the race in preparation period, and a little bit less in this period now. But by and large, once a week. On Tuesdays at 5 o'clock, wherever Alistair and Johnny Brownlee are in the world, they'll be looking for a track to do the normal Tuesday night track session, for example. So yes, and we do it the whole year round.
I was specifically thinking about when you start to go race pace, things break. So to avoid injury and that sort of stuff, what kind of preparation work do you do to avoid the injury so you can actually do the race pace training?
Yeah, well, I wish it was as easy as things breaking only at race pace, because it breaks at other times as well, unfortunately. So it is more for some athletes, it's more hazardous to run fast. For other athletes, it's more hazardous to run slow and long. So it's a very individual, and effectively the reason we do the race pace the whole year round is to try to avoid it being a shock to Achilles, to ligaments when they return to it. And many people would say that those are the critical transition points in the year when you are at bigger risk of injury, are around those transitions between periodized blocks of training, which is one of the reasons we have a very tedious 48 weeks of the year program, is not to have big changes.
The reason I asked that question is I have some experience watching the Ethiopians train, and their top athletes, they might do one hard session a week early in the season because it takes the rest of the week to recover from it. And very rarely in the, say, the last transitional phase before they taper, they might get up to 3 hard workouts and be able to recover from them. When they can do that, they feel they're ready to run fast.
I think the Ethiopians have got it right.
We'll stop here. I'd like to thank Malcolm and Inaki for great insights, and thanks to the audience for questions. So maybe a round of applause for